They fined me for fishing in my own backyard. Not a mistake, an official HOA notice, stamped and threatening, because apparently I was breaking community rules. My peaceful neighborhood had turned into a battlefield overnight, and every friendly face suddenly felt like an enemy. I tried reasoning, ignored the petty threats, but it only got worse. Every letter, every knock at the door escalated the tension. And then I realized this wasn't just about a lake or a fishing rod. It was about control, pride, and revenge waiting to ignite. What would you do if the people next door had the power to ruin your life over something so small? Life in Maplewood Lane had always been peaceful, or at least it seemed that way. I had moved in 5 years ago, drawn by the quiet streets lined with blooming dogwoods and the distant hum of kids riding bikes after school. Our home wasn't extravagant, but it had everything we needed. A small backyard, a cozy deck where I spent weekends sipping coffee, and a tiny lake just beyond the fence where we'd sometimes fish. It felt like the perfect little escape from the chaos of the city. I wasn't a confrontational person. I kept to myself, greeted neighbors with a wave, and even joined the occasional HOA meeting just to stay informed. Everyone seemed friendly enough, or at least polite enough. Life had a rhythm. Morning coffee, lawn care on weekends, barbecues in the summer, and quiet nights watching the sunset from our deck. But there was always a tension just below the surface. Certain neighbors had their pet peeves about property lines, lawn heights, and decorative choices. The HOA, a committee that promised to keep the community beautiful, had a reputation for being strict. Nothing had ever affected me personally, though. That was about to change. It started with a small notice slipped under my door, a fine for fishing in the lake behind my house. At first, I thought it was a joke, or maybe a clerical error. After all, it was my backyard, my lake. But the official stamp and the letterhead told a different story. That one simple notice would unravel the calm of Maplewood Lane and drag me into a storm of petty rules, power struggles, and a battle I never saw coming. And just like that, the world I had built in those quiet streets began to feel less like home and more like a chessboard, where every move could spark a confrontation I wasn't ready for.
The first fine felt like a punch in the gut. $50 for fishing in a lake that technically touched my property? I tried to reason with the HOA board, sending polite emails and attending their monthly meeting. But every attempted dialogue was met with cold indifference or thinly veiled condescension. "Rules are rules," one board member said, adjusting his glasses and staring at me as if I were trying to cheat the system. Soon, the notices multiplied. One week it was a warning about the height of my grass. The next, a reprimand for the unauthorized dock I'd built years ago. Every trivial choice in my yard was suddenly under scrutiny. I began to dread checking the mailbox, each envelope a potential threat, each letter a new escalation. Neighbors who once waved or exchanged smiles started acting differently too. Casual greetings became forced nods. I overheard whispers about me at weekend barbecues and HOA meetings. Some even suggested I was disrupting the harmony of the neighborhood. But what exactly was I disrupting? Sitting quietly by the lake, watching my kids fish, enjoying a Sunday afternoon on my own deck? Then came the notice about the complaint-driven inspection. An HOA-appointed official showed up at my gate, clipboard in hand, scrutinizing every detail of my property. He measured the fence, inspected my lawn ornaments, and took pictures of every flower bed. I tried to explain that nothing was out of compliance, but he smiled politely and said, "We'll review it, and you may hear from us soon." Soon became a nightmare. The fines kept climbing. $50 became $200, then $500. Every check I wrote felt like throwing money into a black hole. Money for rules I hadn't even agreed to, enforcement I hadn't even provoked. At night, I'd lie awake, heart pounding, wondering if I was going to lose more than money, if my home, the place I loved, was under siege and there was nothing I could do. I decided to push back legally. Hiring a lawyer was exhausting and expensive, but necessary. That's when I discovered the full extent of the HOA's power and its willingness to bend the law for petty victories. Their covenants were riddled with vague wording, leaving interpretation entirely to the board's whims. Suddenly, every rule seemed designed to intimidate, to control, to make me feel small. Meanwhile, a few neighbors began to turn hostile in subtle ways. My mailbox was tampered with, my lawn ornaments disappeared overnight. A few even made comments at community events, questioning my integrity and hinting that I was disrupting the harmony of the neighborhood. But what exactly was I disrupting? Sitting quietly by the lake watching my kids fish? Enjoying a Sunday afternoon on my own deck? Yet through all this, I refused to back down. Every fine I paid, every meeting I attended fueled a growing determination inside me. I began documenting everything: letters, notices, conversations, even the harassment from neighbors. Every detail mattered. Every small injustice became evidence that I was facing something bigger than a petty argument. I was facing a system designed to punish anyone who challenged it. And just when I thought the stress couldn't get worse, the HOA announced a public hearing on my violations. They scheduled it at the community clubhouse, inviting all residents to observe. I walked in expecting a formal discussion, but instead found an audience primed to ridicule. The tension was unbearable. The whispers, the judging eyes, the cold stares. It felt like being trapped in a courtroom and a theater at the same time. During that hearing, I realized the HOA's reach went beyond legal rules. It was about control, pride, and humiliation. Every argument they made was less about safety or community standards than about asserting dominance. When I tried to defend my actions, their rebuttals were sharp, personal, and relentless. And in that moment, I knew this wouldn't end with just paying fines. The battle was far from over. The next few weeks escalated into a blur of legal letters, surprise inspections, and community gossip. My family felt the strain too. Children afraid to play near the lake, evenings filled with tension, and dinners where silence replaced conversation. I couldn't shake the feeling that every neighborly interaction might conceal hidden hostility. Even my friends, once supportive, warned me to pick my battles carefully. But how do you ignore injustice when it's happening on your own property, in your own home? Then came the breaking point. The HOA passed a unanimous rule update targeting private fishing rights. Suddenly, the lake behind my home was no longer a place of peace. It was restricted, off limits, and guarded by threats of legal action. I felt cornered, trapped in a world where fairness and common sense had been replaced by bureaucracy and petty power plays. And it was clear the next step I took had to be bigger, bolder, and smarter. I started asking myself, how far would they go? How far would I let them push before I fought back? Not just for fishing, not just for fines, but for my home, my dignity, and my sanity. The answers weren't clear yet, but one thing was certain. The tension had reached a boiling point, and soon the calm streets of Maplewood Lane would erupt in a battle nobody could ignore.
The day of the final hearing arrived, and with it, a storm I could no longer ignore. The community clubhouse felt more like an arena than a meeting space. Chairs were lined in neat rows, the walls adorned with reminders of HOA authority, framed notices, outdated newsletters, and photographs of perfectly manicured lawns, their version of perfection. My stomach churned, a mix of dread and determination. I knew this was the moment everything would either collapse or explode. The board arrived, faces polished with authority, each carrying stacks of documents prepared to prove their dominance. They looked confident, smug even, as if victory had already been written on their faces. The audience of neighbors murmured in anticipation, whispering, exchanging glances, some clearly eager for me to falter. My palms were sweaty, but I held my head high. I had spent weeks gathering evidence, documenting every fine, every harassment, every unlawful notice. I wasn't walking into a trap. I was walking into a battlefield armed with facts. The meeting began formally, but the air was thick with tension. The board president, Mr. Caldwell, started by reciting their accusations: unauthorized fishing, violations of obscure lake use rules, and disrupting the harmony of the neighborhood. Each statement dripped with condescension, designed to humiliate me publicly. I could feel the eyes of my neighbors pierce me like daggers, some nodding in agreement with the board, others in silent judgment. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, to stay grounded. Then it was my turn. I stood feeling the weight of weeks of frustration and injustice pressing down on me. I began to speak, not with anger, but with precision, showing each piece of evidence I had meticulously collected. Letters proving compliance, photographs showing my fishing activities were harmless, witness statements from neighbors who supported me, and legal precedents undermining the board's petty rules. As I laid out each point, the smug expressions of the board faltered slightly, and whispers rippled through the room. "Everything you claim to enforce," I said, locking eyes with Mr. Caldwell, "is based on vague language, personal interpretations, and selective enforcement. There is no fairness here. There is only control, intimidation, and fear. And I refuse to accept it." The room went silent, the tension almost suffocating. Mr. Caldwell attempted to interrupt, but I held up my hand, forcing him to pause. "I've documented everything," I continued, my voice steady but sharp. "Every fine, every threat, every harassment attempt, recorded, photographed, and witnessed. This isn't a dispute about fishing. This is about power. And power, when abused, has consequences." For the first time, I sensed cracks in their armor. The board members whispered among themselves, their authority challenged in front of the entire neighborhood. I could see doubt flicker in their eyes, a dangerous vulnerability that had been invisible in the weeks of relentless pressure. And then I dropped the bombshell. I revealed a legal maneuver I had quietly prepared. The lake, technically part of my property's easement, could be leveraged to restrict access entirely. I had the documentation to prove it. Every neighbor who had once waved or smiled, every board member who had sneered, suddenly realized the tables had turned. The power they had wielded so casually was now slipping through their fingers. Mr. Caldwell's voice wavered. "You can't," he started, but I interrupted. "I already can, and I will if forced. I'm giving you a chance to resolve this fairly today. Otherwise, the lake, the fines, and the rules become moot. The choice is yours." The room erupted into murmurs and nervous glances. Some neighbors gasped audibly, realizing the implications. Others, emboldened by the shifting momentum, began nodding in my favor. The energy had flipped. The hunter had become the hunted. But the board wasn't done. They attempted one last desperate move, a motion to escalate fines and pursue legal action. I responded calmly, citing local property laws, HOA limitations, and precedents that nullified their threats. Every objection they raised was countered with clear evidence and reasoned argument. I could feel the tide turning with every point I made, their confidence eroding. As the hearing drew on, frustration and panic became visible on the board members' faces. The very rules they had wielded like weapons now seemed like chains around their own authority. Finally, after hours of tense debate and strategic counters, a vote was called. The motion to punish me was rejected. My evidence, persistence, and strategic planning not only defended my rights, but also exposed the HOA's overreach to the entire community. I could feel a mixture of relief and adrenaline washing over me. But the climax wasn't over. One final moment cemented the turning point. As the board exited, I noticed several neighbors approaching me, offering apologies, support, and even admiration. The whispers of ridicule had turned to murmurs of respect. The balance of power had shifted. I had stood my ground, and the HOA's aura of invincibility had been shattered. But even as I savored the victory, a thought lingered, one that would haunt me for weeks. Change had been won in this battle, but the neighborhood was forever altered. Relationships were strained, trust had been tested, and the undercurrent of fear and control wasn't fully gone. The board might retreat for now, but would they attempt to rise again? Would new rules, new fines, or new petty disputes emerge to challenge me? I left the hearing that day with a mixture of relief and unease. I had faced the peak of their abuse, countered it decisively, and won. But I had also seen the darker side of community power dynamics, the potential for petty authority to become oppressive. And as I looked back at the calm streets outside, I realized the next chapter wasn't just about fines or fishing. It was about maintaining control, preserving dignity, and ensuring that justice wasn't a fleeting victory.
The dust had finally settled, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe without that constant weight pressing on my chest. The HOA had retreated, the fines were dropped, and the rules they had weaponized against me were now exposed as arbitrary and unenforceable. The battle had been long, exhausting, and emotionally draining, but the victory felt absolute in a way I hadn't expected, not because of the legal win alone, but because I had reclaimed my home, my voice, and my sense of justice. Yet the aftermath of the fight wasn't as simple as walking back onto my lawn and picking up where I had left off. Maplewood Lane was quiet now, but the silence carried the memory of conflict. I noticed neighbors avoiding eye contact, whispers that stopped abruptly when I passed, and subtle gestures of resentment. The HOA board, once an intimidating wall of authority, now walked with caution, aware that their reach had limits and that the community had witnessed their overreach. Despite the tension, there were glimmers of reconciliation. A few neighbors approached me cautiously, offering apologies for having doubted me, for siding with the board out of fear rather than principle. Some even admitted quietly that they were impressed by my perseverance, and a handful admitted that they had been subjected to similar petty rules but had been too intimidated to push back. Slowly, a sense of solidarity began to form. The conflict had fractured the community, but it also opened eyes to the dangers of unchecked authority. The lake, once a point of contention, became a symbol of my resilience. I made changes, not out of revenge, but to assert fairness. Signs were posted to clarify property rights. Fishing guidelines were openly shared, and I even invited neighbors to join in regulated, community-led activities. The irony was delicious. The place that had been used against me to assert control had become the stage for transparency and fairness. Slowly, the tension that had once suffocated the street began to lift. But the fight had also left its mark. My family and I carried the emotional scars of weeks of harassment, sleepless nights, and constant stress. There were moments of doubt when it seemed the battle would never end, and the weight of responsibility for standing up against authority was enormous. But in retrospect, those moments had shaped a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. My home was no longer just a physical space. It was a testament to persistence, courage, and the refusal to be intimidated. Legally, the aftermath was equally instructive. The HOA had been forced to reconsider its approach, and several board members resigned quietly in the following months. They left behind a set of bylaws that were now under scrutiny, with provisions clarified to prevent future abuse. The community learned the hard way that power without accountability is dangerous, and that fear is no substitute for fairness. I had not only defended myself, I had changed the rules of engagement for everyone living here. Socially, the landscape was shifting as well. Some neighbors remained distant, unwilling to reconcile, but others became unexpected allies. Conversations began to center on cooperation rather than compliance, on dialogue rather than confrontation. Community events were attended with renewed civility, and slowly, the culture of fear that had gripped Maplewood Lane began to dissolve. What had started as a personal fight transformed into a broader shift in community dynamics, teaching lessons about authority, fairness, and the consequences of abuse. Financially, the ordeal had cost me time, money, and energy. Every legal fee, Every hour spent documenting notices and attending hearings, every sleepless night, it all added up. But the investment had paid off in the most meaningful way. The restoration of autonomy over my property, the protection of my family's space, and a newfound confidence in standing up to unfair authority. The lake, once a source of fines and frustration, was now a personal and communal victory, a reminder that small actions can resist even the most entrenched power structures. Reflecting on the entire experience, I realized the fight had changed me. I was no longer the passive homeowner who quietly paid fines and avoided conflict. I had become an advocate, not just for myself, but for fairness in my community. I had learned to recognize the subtle ways authority can manipulate rules, the insidious nature of petty power, and the importance of documentation, patience, and strategy. More than anything, I had discovered the value of standing firm, even when everyone else expects you to bend. There were moments of doubt during the battle, times when I questioned whether the struggle was worth it. Each fine, each letter, each whisper of disapproval tested my resolve, but those very moments forged determination, clarity, and purpose. And when the final hearing concluded, I realized that the outcome was about more than fishing or fines. It was about reclaiming a sense of justice, dignity, and respect in a world where bureaucracy often masks personal bias. Looking at the lake now, I could see the reflection of the sunset and the calm water that had once been a source of anxiety. My children played nearby, laughter echoing in a space that had been filled with tension. Neighbors waved, not out of fear, but in genuine acknowledgement of shared humanity. The battle had been won, the conflict resolved, and yet the experience left a lasting impression. Vigilance, courage, and integrity are essential in protecting what you hold dear, even when the rules seem stacked against you. The HOA never fully recovered its aura of intimidation. Its remaining board members now approached enforcement with caution and transparency. Community meetings became forums for dialogue rather than judgment, and the culture of fear gradually gave way to mutual respect. What had started as a personal fight transformed into a broader shift in community dynamics, teaching lessons about authority, fairness, and the consequences of abuse. And as I walked along the lake one evening, thinking back to the days of fines, inspections, and whispered judgments, I realized something profound. The most valuable victories aren't just about winning. They're about standing up, documenting truth, and refusing to be silenced. The fight had changed me, reshaped my community, and left a lasting reminder that even in the most oppressive circumstances, persistence, clarity, and integrity can turn the tide. And in the end, the story of that lake, the fines, and the petty rules became more than a tale of conflict. It became a lesson for anyone facing intimidation, whether from neighbors, boards, or bureaucracies. Do not underestimate the power of evidence, patience, and unwavering resolve. And as the sun set over Maplewood Lane that evening, shimmering on the calm water, I ask myself, and anyone who would listen, this: when faced with injustice, will you step back or will you stand your ground? Because the choice defines everything.